The reconnection. 3 years after the day Liam O'Connell appeared in the cemetery with that impossible T-shirt, Arthur Pendleton walked the streets of Richmond, holding the hand of a boy who had blossomed before his eyes like a plant finally finding sun after years of darkness. Samuel, now 15, carried his father's features, but his eyes held a depth that only those who have faced premature loss can develop. They were returning from school where Samuel had just graduated as the top student in his 6th form, carrying under his arm a certificate that represented far more than excellent grades. It was proof that some stories can indeed have an unexpected, redemptive ending. What a joy to have you here with me. Tell me where you're tuning in from. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let's discover together how this incredible story unfolds. The wind still cut through the streets of London with the same intensity as years ago, but now Arthur no longer walked alone on Sundays. The empty mansion had been sold 2 years prior, and in its place they lived in a cozy house in Richmond, with a garden out back where Samuel had planted a small orchard. Mornings began with the kettle boiling in the kitchen, Samuel studying at the living room table, while Arthur prepared breakfast, a routine he had never imagined having, but which was now the most precious part of his days. The transition had not been easy. Samuel had battled for months against fragmented memories that arrived like unpredictable waves. There were nights he woke screaming, calling out for people he couldn't identify. Other times, he would stand for hours in front of the mirror, as if trying to recognize his own face. Arthur had learned patience during these moments, sitting beside his son without haste, telling stories from when Samuel was small, showing photographs, rebuilding piece by piece a childhood that hospital bureaucracy had tried to erase. During the first few months after their reunion, the house had transformed into a kind of recovery headquarters. Psychologists, solicitors, social workers paraded through the living room, each with their folders and protocols. Samuel observed everything with the seriousness of someone who had grown up too soon, asking direct questions that sometimes left the adults speechless. Why did no one realize the mistake sooner? He had once asked the social worker. If I was alive, why did no one look for me? Arthur felt his chest tighten with the devastating simplicity of the question. The first days were a chaotic mixture of joy, confusion, and silent terror. Arthur would wake several times during the night, checking if Samuel was still there, if the guest room he'd quickly transformed into a teenager's bedroom wasn't empty again. Samuel, for his part, took time to fall asleep, accustomed to the noises and routines of the Elmwood Children's Home. The silence of their Richmond home left him restless, and Arthur often found him at 3 in the morning in the kitchen, making a sandwich or just sitting at the table, gazing out the window. At the Elmwood Children's Home, Samuel explained one of those early mornings, there was always someone crying or snoring or talking in their sleep. The silence makes me think too much. Arthur sat beside his son, pouring 2 mugs of warm milk. Would you like me to leave the radio on quietly? Samuel smiled, a shy but genuine smile. That would be nice. But could you tell me stories about what I was like when I was little? And so a new routine was born. Every evening, Arthur would sit on the edge of Samuel's bed and recount episodes from his son's early childhood. How he was scared of clowns but loved monkeys. How he insisted on wearing the same Superman t-shirt for 3 days straight. How he asked impossible questions about where the sky ended. These nightly reconnection sessions became sacred for both of them. Samuel absorbed every detail, as if he were putting together a puzzle of his own identity, sometimes closing his eyes and trying to remember. I sort of remember the plush monkey, he said one evening. Or I think I do. Sometimes I don't know if it's a real memory or if I'm creating the memory from what you tell me. Arthur had learned not to pressure these memories. Dr. Alistair Finch, the neuropsychologist overseeing the case, had explained that Samuel's mind needed time to reorganize years of conflicting information. The answer came in pieces, over months of investigation. St. Jude's General Hospital had been undergoing an administrative crisis precisely at the time of the incident. Overworked staff, neglected protocols, inadequate supervision. The mix-up of identification bracelets had been just the first error in a sequence that had stretched on for years. When they realized the confusion, the decision to conceal it was made in emergency meetings, with lawyers calculating the costs of a lawsuit versus the institution's prestige. Samuel had become an inconvenient statistic, easier to hide than to correct. George Davies delved deep into the system's core. He discovered that the night of the accident had been particularly chaotic. A school bus had overturned in the rain, bringing 7 injured children in at once. Dr. Thomas Everett, the junior doctor on duty, was at the end of an 18-hour shift. The senior nurse had left to attend to an emergency on another floor. The junior doctors on call were inexperienced, working under extreme pressure. It was a perfect storm, George explained in a tense meeting. When Leo Clark died and Samuel was transferred, someone attached the wrong death certificate to the wrong medical record. An error of mere seconds that changed 2 lives forever. But the true betrayal began later. When Eleanor Ellie Croft realized the error the following morning, she immediately sought out her supervisor. Her discovery reached Dr. Malcolm Thorpe, the administrative director, who quickly calculated the implications. A financially troubled hospital could not withstand a medical negligence scandal involving an influential family like the Pendletons. The decision was made in a closed room with only 4 people present. Samuel would be quietly transferred to the Elmwood Children's Home under Leo Clark's identity. The documents would be altered. Ellie would be forced into silence with threats of a lawsuit for negligence. "They called me into a room," Ellie recounted during one of her visits, her hands trembling as she held her teacup. "They said if I spoke a word, I'd be held accountable for the error, that I'd lose my pension, that they would sue my family. I had young grandchildren, Mr. Pendleton. I needed my pension money." Samuel, who had overheard the conversation from the kitchen, came to sit beside her. "You weren't to blame," he said with his characteristic maturity. "You tried to do the right thing. It was the others who chose wrong." But the truth, as Arthur had learned, has a persistence no bureaucracy can stifle for long. Eleanor Ellie Croft, the retired nurse who had finally spoken out, became a kind of honorary aunt to Samuel. She visited on Saturday afternoons, bringing homemade treats and stories of her own grandchildren. "I carried this burden for 5 years," she once said, watching Samuel play in the garden. "Seeing you both together is the only thing that allows me to sleep in peace." George Davies, the private investigator, had also become a constant presence. He had continued working on the case even after receiving payment, driven by something that went beyond professional duty. It was he who tracked down every falsified document, every employee involved in the cover-up, every legal loophole that had allowed the situation to perpetuate. "It's not just about you," he explained to Arthur on a rainy afternoon. "How many other families might be going through the same? How many other Samuels are lost in the system?" The question was not rhetorical. The Reunited Families Trust, founded by Arthur Pendleton, had already identified 17 suspected cases of identity swaps or incorrect documentation in hospitals across the region. Each case represented a shattered family, a child lost in bureaucratic limbo, a chance for reunion dependent on someone willing to look beyond appearances. Samuel, despite his youth, actively participated in the Foundation's meetings, his presence serving as a living reminder that miracles are possible when persistence meets truth. The first significant case emerged 6 months after the Foundation's creation. A mother named Sarah Thompson sought help after reading about Arthur and Samuel in the newspaper. Her daughter, Poppy, had vanished during a commotion at St. Jude's General Hospital 3 years prior. "They said she died," Sarah explained, clutching a yellowed envelope of photographs. "But I never accepted it. A mother knows when something isn't right." George Davies accepted the case pro bono, moved by its similarity to Samuel's situation. The investigation revealed disturbing patterns. The same hospital where Poppy had died had recorded 5 suspicious infant deaths over the past 4 years, all involving children without a family present during emergencies. George uncovered an informal network of staff who facilitated illegal adoptions, falsifying death certificates for children who were then sold to families willing to pay for quick adoption processes. Poppy was found on a rural farm in Kent, living with a family who believed they had legitimately adopted an orphan. The reunion was emotionally devastating. The girl, now 8 years old, didn't recognize her biological mother and had developed genuine bonds with her adoptive family. Samuel accompanied Arthur on the first visit, and it was his suggestion that led to the solution: a gradual reintegration process that allowed Poppy to maintain contact with both families, acknowledging that she had developed real love for her adoptive parents, even if the adoption's origin was criminal. Sometimes, Samuel shared during a foundation meeting, the solution isn't just finding the lost person, it's finding a way to heal all the broken hearts in the process. His unique perspective, someone who had experienced both loss and reunion, had become essential for navigating these complex situations. The afternoons at their new home settled into a rhythm all their own. Samuel would often study in the garden when the weather permitted, while Arthur, having scaled back his work hours, made sure he was always more present. They cooked together. Samuel had revealed a genuine talent in the kitchen, possessing an impressive patience with spices and flavors. As they prepared dinner, they'd talk about everything: school, friends, future plans, and even fragments of memories that were slowly returning. Samuel had spoken about his decision to study medicine, specifically pediatrics. "I want to work with children who are confused about who they are," he'd simply said. "I think I can help." Arthur watched his son with growing admiration. Samuel had developed an emotional maturity that few adults possess, tempered by a genuine compassion for those in difficult circumstances. At school, he had quickly become the student others sought out when they needed help or advice. Teachers often commented on his ability to mediate conflicts among his peers and his knack for understanding different perspectives. "It's as if he's lived several lives," the head teacher remarked during a parents' meeting. In a way, that was precisely it. Samuel carried memories of two childhoods: the true one, abruptly interrupted at 7 years old, and the invented one built upon a false identity at the Elmwood Children's Home. For a long time, these two realities had wrestled in his mind like poorly tuned radio stations, but gradually, with therapeutic help and Arthur's patient love, he had learned to integrate both experiences into a coherent narrative of his own life. At school, Samuel stood out not just for his grades, but for the way he connected with classmates and teachers. There was a special quality to his attention. When someone spoke to him, Samuel listened with an intensity that made the person feel truly heard. Teachers quickly noticed that shy students or those facing difficulties naturally gravitated towards him. During break times, it was common to find him helping a classmate with maths or simply chatting with someone who seemed lonely. "Samuel has something we can't teach," remarked Mrs. Davies, the literature teacher, during a parents' meeting. "Genuine empathy, an ability to sense when someone is hurting even when they try to hide it. It's as if he's developed a special antenna for another's pain." Arthur smiled, knowing exactly where this sensitivity came from. Samuel had learned at the Elmwood Children's Home to recognize subtle signs of sadness or fear in other children. It was a survival skill that had transformed into a gift for connecting with people. A particularly striking incident occurred during his second year at the new school. A boy named Omar Khan, the son of immigrants, was being bullied by classmates who mocked his accent and financial situation. Samuel noticed the situation even before the teachers did. Without drawing attention, he started sitting beside Omar during lunch, including him in study groups, subtly defending him when needed. When Omar's mother thanked Arthur for raising such a special son, she mentioned something that deeply touched both of them. Omar said Samuel is the first person who made him feel he wasn't alone in the world. "I don't want to forget the children's home," Samuel said one evening, surprising Arthur. They were on the veranda watching the stars after a particularly difficult day at school. "I mean, it was horrible not knowing who I really was, but I met incredible children there. I learned important things. If I forget everything, it's like they never existed." Arthur hugged his son, understanding that Samuel had developed a wisdom about loss and recovery that many therapists took years to acquire. On weekends, they frequently visited Liam at the cemetery. The boy continued his routine of bringing flowers to abandoned graves, but now he always arrived with a smile when he saw Arthur and Samuel approaching. Samuel had become a sort of older brother to Liam, teaching him to read better, helping with the homework the boy did alone in a house where the adults worked too much to pay attention. "Liam was our angel," Samuel would say. "Without him, you would never have discovered the truth." The relationship between father and son had deepened in ways Arthur had never imagined possible. During Samuel's early years, he had been too busy building his business empire to notice the details. The facial expressions that revealed unspoken thoughts, the night fears that needed conversation and not just a light left on, the dreams and aspirations that formed day after day in a child's mind. Now he paid attention to everything. He knew the way Samuel furrowed his brow when he was concentrating, knew he liked to eat the egg white before the yolk, noticed when something at school bothered him even before Samuel mentioned it. "You've changed so much," Samuel said one afternoon, as they helped Mrs. Croft organize donations for the Elmwood Children's Home where he had grown up. "I mean, from the photos and stories you tell me, you were very different before." Arthur stopped folding clothes and looked at his son. "What do you mean?" Samuel chose his words carefully. "More distant, perhaps. As if you were always thinking about other things. Now you're always present, like truly present." Samuel's observation hit Arthur with unexpected force. The boy was right. The man who had buried a son 5 years ago was not the same one now folding donated clothes on a Saturday afternoon. Loss had shattered something fundamental in his being, but the reunion had painstakingly rebuilt it into a vastly improved version. He had learned that professional success without human connection was merely an elaborate form of solitude, that contracts and corporate acquisitions could never fill the void left by neglected relationships. "Losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me," Arthur confessed, sitting beside Samuel. "But perhaps it was necessary for me to truly grasp what truly matters. When I found you again, I promised myself things would be different, and I'm striving to honor that promise every single day." Samuel smiled, a profound look of forgiveness and understanding beyond his years gracing his face. "You are, Dad. And you know what's even more incredible? I think I needed those years to understand some things too. At the Elmwood Children's Home, I learned to be independent, to look after myself, never to take anything for granted. Now I can appreciate our family in a way I might not have been able to before." Samuel's maturity sometimes startled Arthur, yet it filled him with immense pride. The boy had cultivated a perspective on life and loss that many adults never quite attain. At school, he became a natural advocate for new or shy students, using his own experience of displacement to help others find their footing. Teachers often sought his assistance with challenging pupils, recognizing his unique ability to connect with those who felt lost or misunderstood. During their family therapy sessions, which continued even after the most acute traumas had been processed, their therapist, Dr. Eleanor Vance, and patients explored dynamics that went far beyond post-trauma recovery. "You have a second chance, Doctor," Vance once remarked. "How many families get to restart knowing precisely what they lost the first time around? It's a rare opportunity to correct past missteps, to be deliberately different." Arthur and Samuel emerged from these sessions with a renewed sense of purpose, as if each day was a blank page in a story they could consciously author. The reunited family's trust expanded far beyond its initial expectations. What began as a deeply personal quest for justice had blossomed into a national organization that reformed hospital protocols, trained staff in preventing identification errors, and established a vital support network for families in similar heart-wrenching situations. Samuel actively participated in awareness campaigns, his own powerful story serving as compelling proof that systems can indeed be corrected when there's sufficient political will and societal pressure. On a December afternoon, 3 years after their reconnection, Arthur and Samuel received an unexpected visit from a family from Yorkshire. The parents, David and Emma Miller, were accompanied by an 8-year-old girl they had just been reunited with after 4 years of separation. Their case was similar: hospital mix-up, incorrect documentation, years of fruitless searching. "You gave us hope," Emma said, holding her daughter's hand. "When we saw your interview on television, we decided to try one more time, and it worked." Samuel spoke at length with the girl, sharing strategies for coping with conflicting memories and feelings of confusion. Arthur watched his son patiently explain how some memories return gradually, how it's normal to feel both anger and gratitude simultaneously, how families rebuild bonds of trust step by step. "The important thing," Samuel said, crouching down to the child's level, "is not to rush. Some days will be difficult, others will be wonderful, but you are together now and that's what matters. That evening, after the Miller family had left, Arthur and Samuel sat on the veranda for their daily conversation. It was a ritual they had developed during their first months together and maintained even after their routine had stabilized. In these moments, they shared thoughts about the day, worries about the future, reflections on the past. It was a sacred time where both allowed themselves to be completely vulnerable with each other. "Sometimes I think," Samuel said, watching the first stars appear in the sky, "about all the people still looking for someone. Like the Miller family was looking for their daughter. Like you were looking for me without knowing I was alive. It's a strange feeling to know our story had a happy ending when so many others don't." Arthur nodded, understanding the emotional weight his son carried. Samuel had developed an acute awareness of others' suffering, a direct result of his own experience with loss and recovery. "I think that's why the reunited family's trust is so important," Samuel continued. "It's not just about finding lost people, it's about giving hope to those who are still searching, about showing that miracles can happen when you don't give up." Arthur smiled, realizing how his son had internalized the deepest lessons of his experience. Samuel had not merely survived the trauma of separation, he had found a life's purpose based on transforming personal suffering into strength to help others. The years at Elmwood Children's Home, which could have merely been a painful scar, had instead become a wellspring of empathetic understanding, guiding Samuel's decisions. He comprehended what it meant to awaken daily without certainty of one's identity. He knew the feeling of perpetually awaiting someone to claim him, and he grasped the intricate blend of affection and resentment that abandoned children foster towards figures of authority. This singular experience rendered him particularly effective when engaging with other children in analogous circumstances. "Do you know what I've realized recently?" Samuel remarked during a dinner conversation. "At Elmwood Children's Home, I always felt distinct from the other boys. I couldn't articulate why, but there was something within me that didn't quite belong. Now I comprehend it was because I truly wasn't meant for that place. A part of me always knew there was another place where I ought to be." Arthur was moved by the revelation, understanding that even throughout their years of separation, some invisible force had preserved the connection between them. The house had become a gathering point for other families, aided by the reunited family's trust. Regularly, they hosted visits from individuals who had reconnected after years of separation. Parents who discovered children presumed deceased, children who unearthed their true identities following decades of bewilderment. Each narrative presented its specific intricacies, yet all shared common elements: the tenacity required to persist in searching, the bureaucracy that often hindered rather than facilitated reunions, and the profound transformation that occurs when families reconnect. Samuel became a kind of informal counselor for these families. His youth and personal experience forged a credibility that older professionals, despite their commendable intentions, could not quite attain. He understood precisely how to grapple with guilt for not recalling everything, how to manage unrealistic expectations regarding immediate readaptation, and how to navigate the emotional complexity of loving individuals who are simultaneously familiar and estranged. "What impresses me most about Samuel," remarked Dr. Alistair Finch, a psychologist assisting several families from the Reunited Families Trust, "is how he managed to transmute trauma into wisdom. Most individuals undergoing similar experiences become ensnared by the negative aspects. He succeeded in extracting strength and purpose from an objectively dreadful situation." Arthur concurred, acknowledging in his son a resilience that extended far beyond his own capacity for recovery. On Friday evenings, Arthur and Samuel maintained a special tradition. They would cook a new recipe together, experimenting with flavors and culinary techniques neither of them had known before. It was a playful way to symbolize how they were building something new from scratch, without relying solely on old memories or preconceived expectations. Samuel had revealed himself to be an intuitive cook, with a natural ability to balance seasonings and textures. Arthur had learned to relax his need for control, allowing his son to take the lead in the kitchen. The first of these culinary Fridays happened by chance. Samuel had mentioned that at Elmwood Children's Home, they only ate simple food, always the same things. "I always wondered what it would be like to try foods from other countries," he said one afternoon. Arthur, who for years of executive life had only eaten in expensive restaurants but never learned to cook, suggested they explore together. They bought a book of international recipes and decided to try an Italian dish that weekend. The initial result was disastrous, a lasagna that was burnt on the outside and raw in the middle. But amidst laughter and attempts to salvage the dish, something magical happened. Father and son connected in a completely new way, free from the pressure of rebuilding memories or processing trauma. They were simply two people discovering together that cooking could be fun, even when, especially when, things went wrong. "Cooking is like our family," Samuel said one of those Fridays, as they experimented with a particularly complex Thai recipe. "We're creating something that never existed before, mixing ingredients we know with others that are completely new. Sometimes it goes wrong, but we learn and try again." The analogy was perfect, and Arthur realized how his son had developed a metaphorical capacity for understanding complex situations. These evenings became sacred. Arthur cancelled any professional engagements, switched off his phone, and dedicated himself entirely to the experience. Samuel planned the recipes during the week, researching ingredients and techniques. They created a notebook with their culinary creations, photographing each dish and noting modifications they had made. After 2 years, they had almost 100 tested recipes, each associated with an important conversation, a discovery about the other, a moment of special connection. During his final year of sixth form, Samuel excelled not only academically, but also as a student leader. He was unanimously elected president of the student council, organized fundraising campaigns for local children's homes, and established a tutoring program for struggling students. His teachers often remarked on his exceptional maturity and his ability to connect with people of all ages and backgrounds. "It's rare to find young people who combine seriousness with such lightheartedness," the head teacher said during the graduation ceremony. Samuel's graduation speech moved the entire school. Without specifically mentioning his personal history, he spoke about second chances, about identity being built day by day, and the importance of never giving up on loved ones, even when all seems lost. "Sometimes," he told a completely silent audience, "life separates us from those who matter most. But if we keep hope alive and the willingness to search, love always finds its way back." Arthur watched the speech with tears, realizing his son had transformed into someone able to inspire others through his own journey. The boy lost within the hospital system had become a young man, dedicating his life to ensuring other children would not endure the same experience. Pain had become purpose, and purpose a force touching hundreds of lives. That evening, after the graduation party, father and son sat once again on the veranda for their daily conversation. This time, however, the mood was one of celebration and reflection on the future. Samuel had been accepted into medicine at university, with a full scholarship due to his academic record and voluntary work. In a few months, he would embark on a new phase, yet both knew the connection forged over these years would remain unshakable. "You have no idea how proud I am," Arthur said, watching his son, soon to be an independent adult. "Not just for the graduation or for university, for the man you have become, for how you've transformed our story into something that can help others." Samuel smiled, a smile carrying all the wisdom accumulated during years of family rebuilding. "I learned from the best teacher," he replied. "You showed me that true love never gives up, even when all the evidence suggests otherwise." As the stars shone over the house that had become their true home, Arthur held his son's hand. He whispered the mantra of their lives: "Never give up. Even when all seems lost, the truth finds its way." Samuel, now a young man ready to conquer the world, replied with the certainty of one who had witnessed miracles when persistence meets love. And love always finds its way back home. If this story moved you as much as it did me, click the video appearing on your screen now to discover another story that will touch your heart. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next incredible stories I've brought for you.